Let's begin with some headlines above the nameplate. Court rules on Fulani herdsmen on June 21. The story is on page 5 of the authority. Mimiko quits PDP. Labour Party rejects him. Page 5 has details of that story. Then Customs intercepts cars rise worth 1.4 billion naira. The story can be found on page 14. Bandits killed 10 in Zamfara, a fresh attack, page 2 of the authority. Now, the main headline this morning, federal government to fix 14 roads with 185 billion naira. With 3 riders here. Expects $500 million repatriated loot from U.S., Switzerland. Buhari signs 2018 budget next week to amend Public Holiday Act for June 12. Now, in the foot of the authority, we have some stories there. That's below the photograph. Why we sacked generals, others in 2016 by the army. Page 4 is where you can find that story. And again, federal government replaces permanent secretary accused of undermining ONU. ONU is the Minister of Science and Technology. Bayo.
Yes, the clarification provided by the Attorney General of the Federation was after the Federal Executive Council, and he said there is no law compelling the President to make any consultation before conferring national honors on anyone. He recalled that it was not the first time such posthumous honors has been bestowed on Nigeria, citing the late former head of state, General Murtala Mohammed, who was so posthumously honored. He said he, however, agreed that the Public Holidays Act has to be amended to accommodate June 12 as Democracy Day, and he indicated that already progress is on to ensure that the amendment has begun to make the declaration of the Mr. President very effective. In the same vein, at the Federal Executive Council, there was also a brief that Nigeria is to receive the sum of $500 million from the United Kingdom, USA, and France as part of the Abuja loot. The Attorney General disclosed that after the Federal Executive Council meeting. This also showed that it's coming $322 million was earlier on received from Switzerland. The other positive story also is about the Federal Executive Council. It indicated that a sum of 185.27 billion is to be spent for rehabilitation, construction, and of 14. And the Federal Executive Council approved the roads. The roads are linking several states of the Federation in the northeast, Yobe and Adamawa, in the north central, involving Benue, Ekiti, and Kwara, and the southwest, Ekiti, Oyo, Ugu, and in the southeast, involving Enugu, Abia, and Anambra. Sokoto in the northwest is also involved, so also is River. The indication is that the 2018 budget also will be signed next week, which means that this approval is part of the expenditure for 2017 budget.
All right, Bayo, let's return to other headlines. New Telegraph newspaper from top to bottom. The federal government set to repatriate fresh $500 million Abacha loot with rider. Federal Executive Council approves 185 billion naira for road construction and repairs. Of course, that is unrelated to the Abacha loot, except for the briefing at the Federal Executive Council. Now, German firms generate 300 billion naira turnover annually in Nigeria. That's a bit. Two of headlines below the late ex-chief of staff forfeits 2.2 billion naira to the federal government. That can be found on page 30. And the story that Kiri and one of the other papers, Labour Party kicks as Mimiko returns to party. That's on page 32. NBS, National Bureau of Statistics, inflation crashes to 11.61%. And that's the 16th time, or the 16th consecutive month. Details can be found on page 7. MTN penalty. Federal government approves 500 million naira legal fees for 330 billion naira payment. Lead story says APC mulls postponement of national convention. And paucity of funds hits committee. And then governors to Buhari, we must be prepared ahead of 2019. A brief vows to Shomole. That's on 5. And the story that Kieran also talked about the seizure of contraband goods. You have the photograph there, saying rice and other goods. I think these are gas cylinders, plus other things. And of course, you have some unfortunate stories there relating to homicide.
All right, let's conclude so that Bio can now come in finally. Leadership newspaper, just below the nameplate is Dangote emerges most admired African brand. That's when it comes to business. All right, now the main headline, Philip for 2018 budget as federal government plans injection of fresh $500 million Bachalut. Kingsley also read that story in that newspaper. Now, with a rider here, FEC okays 185 billion for 14 road projects. President Muhammad Buhari to sign budget next week. Now, we won't tolerate you any longer. APC tells Okorocha. Details of that story is on page 6 of leadership. Now, below the photograph, gunmen kill 40 in first Zamfara attack. Other papers had 10 or about. We would like to know the actual number of people killed.
Well, it's one other paper, that's the Daily Sun. Daily Sun included the killing also in Nasser, bringing the total to 14.
To 14.
But 10 were said to have been killed in Zamfara.
Yeah. All right. Here, this paper has 40 in Zamfara as well. Now, Idil Fitri, IGP deploys massive personnel. Page 10 has the story. Then, court sacks Kogi Senator Aidoko. Page 39 of leadership. Bio.
Yes, the story that I read earlier on, the forfeiture actually ordered by the Federal High Court of Lagos is one. It is for a sum of 2.2 billion to be forfeited to the federal government. There's also another one. This is a sum of seized from a former chief of air staff, and another one from 190.8 million seized from director of finance, as well as 110 million seized from Solomon Enterprises, allegedly owned by the former chief of air staff. They have up to 29th of this month to show reason why those funds should not be permanently forfeited to the federal government. The indication given to the court were that these were sums meant for the Nigerian Air Force and were withdrawn from the accounts without appropriate appropriation. The theater commander of the Operation Lafia Doli has a brief of the activities in the last 17 months and is very, very chilling. He says the theater commander General Nicholas, 728 Boko Haram insurgents were killed, 326 in custody after being arrested, 382 surrendered. So far, 840 villages were cleared of insurgents, and as many as 452 were assaulted weapons recovered from the insurgents. The other area of concern is that there were a total of 122 attacks by Boko Haram, and these were rated by the vigilant Nigerian soldiers. Unfortunately, we lost 80 of our compatriots to the insurgency, and 170 soldiers were wounded. The theater commander gave indications that the cooperation between the forces of Chadian, Cameroon, and Nigerian helps tremendously driving out the insurgents from Sambisa Forest as well as Mandara Mountain in the Frejis Cameroon border.
All right.
Kira, just before you have your editorial, before we go to the editorial, as we say, the world knows FIFA World Cup is kicking off today in Russia, and there is a story on the front page of the New Telegraph. You have a story there. It says FIFA World Cup kicks off in Russia. New Telegraph. That's where we have the story. If we can see that right there on the, if we have that on the screen now, we can refer to that. There are two writers there, but one of the writers is of interest. It says Mystic Pig predicts Eagles to reach semis. Mystic Pig predicts Eagles to reach semis. If you recall, there was also a Mystic Octopus
in South Africa.
In South Africa.
Yes.
All right.
8 years ago.
Yeah, actually, the world is already agog with the greatest show on earth, which, of course, as Clinton said, kicks off. But be a football commentator. Some of us played the game, and
you played with Enugu Rangers.
We played the game.
We are talking about the World Cup.
Yes,
amateur attempts at football.
Yeah, because he was trying to bring in Enugu Rangers again, and I always remind him that they were defeated by Bendel Insurance in the FA Cup final in 1978, 3-0.
You were a commentator, and I played. Now let's look at what we have from experience now. Nigerian Super Eagles are one of the finalists in this game. And what concerns Africa is that we have 5 African nations: Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, Senegal, in Russia. And Russia is actually hosting World Cup for the first time.
Yes, Russia is hosting the Senior World Cup for the first time. In 1985, it hosted the Under-20, for which Nigeria played and came back from there with a bronze medal. Meanwhile, this World Cup we're talking about is the 21st edition. So far, 32 participating teams, and there will be 64 matches that will be played over 32 days. There are 8 groups in Nigeria that qualified playing in Group D. Of course, the opponents of Nigeria are already known. Now, one of the highlights of the World Cup that interests me is that the outfit of the Super Eagles has caught the fancy of everybody around the world. Also, their jersey is so popular that it's sold over 10 million copies already. Now, the football opponents of Nigeria have described the Super Eagles as the most disorganized team, but is capable of disorganizing any other team. For me, I take that as a backhanded compliment, and probably also an indication of the surprise that the Super Eagles are likely to spring at the World Cup. Gennett All has said that, well, the players are ready, and team captain Mikel Obi says the players are ready to work hard. Now, when you talk about the World Cups, the president reminded the Super Eagles they have 180 million Nigerians, their hearts in their hands. And that reminds me, the concern that Nigerians show to football. It started, in fact, in 1985, when our Under-17 won the World Cup. That brought attention of even our mothers, because of the youthful footballers, to football. And so that during Canada 87 Under-17 match, Nigeria recorded one of the highest instances of high blood pressure, particularly among women, when Philip Osondu group tried very well, but came back home after losing to Russia, and when they came home with silver. Since then, the followership of football has grown tremendously. I remember also on the Under-20 series, in the bid to reach the quarterfinal series, Mobi Oparaku's mother was interviewed, and Mobi was one of the Nigerian players that was dreaded by the opponents. Mobi's mother said, I like what Mobi is playing, but I'm afraid we want to break Mobi's leg. You see, there is anxiety, and they have the spirit of 180 million Nigerians supporting the Super Eagles.
All right. Toby, thank you very much. Maybe the chairman of the National Population Commission, should have to brief the presidency, because he had said in New York that we are 198 million, not 180 million. So there are 198 million Nigerians
projections
behind the Super Eagles. Let's see how we'll begin to plan Saturday when we have our first match. Bayo, thanks a lot for being around.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we'll see you again tomorrow. Let's take a short break now. When we return, they will be dealing with another set of reforms in the civil service.
We thank you for staying with us up till this moment. And we are taking off with this background report on reforms in civil service put together by Mitaire Iben.
The civil service of the Federation is a huge non-political workforce that drives the policies and programs of government towards achieving socio-economic development. The slow, bureaucratic and ineffective factors associated with the service have always led to a barrage of criticisms from the public. Several reforms have been introduced to address these anomalies, but the civil service was far from being effective. Upon assumption of office on May 29, 2015, President Muhammadu Buhari made clear that his administration will rebuild and reform the public service to become more effective and more serviceable, with a specific charge to civil servants to discharge their duties with integrity. His reputation as an incorruptible and disciplined functionality made civil servants start reporting contrary to work. A 3-year strategy and implementation plan to reform the Nigerian civil service was introduced, in line with the change agenda of the government of the day. 3 years down the line, the Nigerian civil service is repositioning to offer effective service delivery, with more than 50,000 ghost workers eliminated from the IPPIS payroll, which saved the government about 200 billion naira. The implementation of the Treasury single account has equally gone a long way in blocking leakages and other types of corruption which bedeviled the civil service in the past. Packages and policies towards improving the welfare and productivity of civil servants, such as the Federal Integrated Staff Housing Scheme (FISH), aimed at providing affordable housing for civil servants, were introduced. To what extent is the reform impacting on the civil service, and how is the service faring in the change agenda of the present administration? These and other issues will be examined by guests on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much, for that background that we have with us here in the studios. So, because this is in detail with Mrs. Winifred Oyoita, who is head of the civil service of the Federation. Mrs. Oyoita, pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
And then also here with us in the studios is Dr. Otiva Ibuzo. Otiva Ibuzo, of course, is Executive Director, African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development. Ibuzo, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. And we have joining us via Skype from Holland, Dr. Joe Abba. Joe Abba was the former Director General, Bureau of Public Service Reforms. It's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Abba, join us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, and good morning, Head of Service. Good morning, OTV. Good morning, Nigerians.
Good morning, Joe.
All right, let's begin the conversation first with the head of the civil service of the Federation. Cast your mind back to when you took over as the head of the civil service of the Federation. What was it that you meant, and what did it that was driving you to do what you were going to do?
Actually, I was sworn in January 2016 after having acted as the head of service for about 2 months. And I, of course, being a civil servant all my life, I wasn't surprised at what I met on ground, but I didn't realize how very, very serious the situation was, really. I met a service that the civil servants extremely demoralized, somewhat nonchalant in their work attitude, and a few was putting in their best, struggling against all odds to perform creditably. But then just a few, and then of course the daunting task of the work environment and corrupt practices here and there, you know. So immediately I had to, set up a think tank, made up of some permanent secretaries, directors, both serving and retired, 2 people from the private sector. We were about, I believe, about 7 of us, and sat down to see what can be done to salvage the service. Because when you consider the fact that the whole governance structure is on the backbone of the service, and if the civil service is not performing excellently well, government's policies and programs will not be successful, cannot be successful, because it's these bureaucrats that will do the work. And it will tell on Nigerians and the expectations Nigerians have for government. So the role of the civil service is extremely important. So that's what I did when I took over. I set up this think tank. And that was the first time that a reform structure will be developed by civil servants for civil servants.
All right, Ma, you have a wealth of experience in civil service, having risen through the ranks to become permanent secretary. This appointment. Now you have told us a little bit of your first line of action, when you took over. But how did that go after setting up the think tank, which you of course rightly put? You said it's a think tank meant to develop reforms by the civil servants for the civil servants. In any case, we also know that there have been reforms over the years, right, that perhaps did not impact positively on the civil service. That was why you met what you met when you came. Now, how far did this your first line of action go in trying to turn things around for the civil service?
Well, first, what happened with that draft program, we brought it up to the body of permanent secretaries, circulated it. The permanent secretaries also gave contributions and ideas, and of course some of the retired heads of service and retired permanent secretaries. It was also presented at the Council of Retired Federal Permanent Secretaries for their review, because we wanted to draw on as much experience as possible to find out why past reforms hadn't worked. Those who had either been the architects or the executors of these past reforms. So initially, as to be expected, there was that resistance among the civil servants, because they were a bit worried when they looked at some of the very new ideas that seemed to be breaking the frontiers of what the civil service structure should be. And we had to meet with the unions to explain to them that some of these new ideas, programs we were trying to initiate would not impact negatively on labor in terms of the labor something, but it's meant to bring out the epic vision that we have for the service. That's a service that's efficient, productive, incorruptible, and citizen-centered. So initially, yes, we did meet some resistance.
Well, let's back up a bit. What did you find with what went wrong with previous reforms?
Oh, that's a good question, because people have asked that, what do you think you're going to do differently this time to make this reform work? We went into all the past, there have been since 1999 when the democratic government came in, there have been about 30 public service reforms, general or far-reaching reforms in government. But 10 we identified as specific to the civil service. And the success rate was abysmally low. And when we studied what went wrong, we discovered that these programs were very articulate, very well thought out, beautifully presented with a lot of fanfare. But that was just the end. There was no implementation structure or strategy that was brought in as to how is this thing actually going to move from the drawing board into a reality. That's why this from Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan 2017 to 2020, which is aligned with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan of government, has 5 peculiar characteristics. One, it is specific. It has that flavor of specificity. It has identified specific low-hanging fruits that we can target within this time range. Secondly, for each of these 8 activities that we have identified, we have a budget, a cost structure for implementation. So we know where, how far we can draw from government, and then the large deficit, because government cannot fund everything. Large deficit, we are looking outside government. Then thirdly, in doing this, we identify that we have to have partnerships outside government. partnerships with the private sector that have indicated a lot of interest in working with government, and international donor agencies and so on. Then fourthly, there has to be a clear governance structure, which we have worked out. We have a three-tier governance structure. From the project management teams that are active, there's a project management office that is working on a daily basis to draw up and bring out these strategies. Then we move to the steering committee, which I head with the Permanent Secretary, Service Policy and Strategies Office, and key line directors that are drawn from both the Office of Head of Service and from outside the Head of Service. And then the highest level is in the reporting structure is the presidential briefing team, which His Excellency Mr. President has so graciously approved to chair. And on a quarterly basis, we are to brief Mr. President on the goings on, the achievements, the challenges, and so on. And this presidential briefing team has key ministers. We have written to the ministers, and they have given us a lot of support. The ministers that will be on this presidential briefing team include the ministers for budget and national planning, finance, science and technology, communications, labor and employment, which is very important, very critical, and the Attorney General of the Federation, because whatever we are doing, we must make sure we are within the ambits of the law. So, and then again, in the presidential briefing team, we will have the our champions, our private sector leaders, who are the champions. We have already engaged with the private sector, and a lot of them are very keen on working with us, and also our donor partners, the leadership here in the country. So we have that clear governance structure. So we know that this is how we are moving, and this is who is checkmating what.
All right, madam, the challenge has always been the implementation of the reforms. Now, are you getting all the cooperation that you need from the high-ranking civil servants who are actually going to be your partners in terms of implementing these reforms? Are you getting that cooperation? Are you still meeting some challenges, you know, in your drive to ensure that the reform becomes effective and impactful?
What we have done is, because this is a reform that is designed by civil servants, like I said at the beginning. The key members, the team leaders for the project management, 8 project management teams, are directors from within the civil service. And the membership of the team is also drawn from within the civil service. And even at the last sensitization workshop we had, I took time to explain to civil servants that this is their turf. They have to take ownership of this program, that it's not being pushed down their throat from somewhere else. It is something that within the service we have all sat together. Everybody was given opportunity to critique the program. So because they have this, they now have, of course initially was that suspicion, you know, but now they have taken ownership, and they are extremely excited about it, because they can see the far-reaching impact the program will have on the service, and indeed on themselves.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Oyo. We'll pause you in the meantime and then go over to Holland. You'll see him on the screen pop up from time to time. He's joining us via Skype. That's Dr. Joe Abba, former Director General of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms. You've listened to the incumbent head of the Civil Service of the Federation, and you were, of course, in charge of the Bureau of Public Sector Reforms. But From what we do get to experience and what she's confirmed, it would appear to be the case that previous sector reforms didn't quite give us the joy that we desired. And here we are again with another set of reforms branded epic. Is this a merry-go-round?
No, it's not a merry-go-round at all. Reforms are continuous. There is no single reform that you do that will solve all your problems forever. And that's why, excuse me, that's why it's important that the system continues to be tweaked, the challenges continue to be addressed. So even the most advanced countries in the world still carry out ongoing public service reforms all the time. The current reforms by the head of service has a number of benefits, some of which she has pointed out. The issues have been prioritized. The actions to be taken are specific. There's a clear governance structure. There's a clear communication plan, of which I think even this program is part of. And it's gone outside the confines of the civil service alone to seek partnerships with others. Of course, there remain some challenges. You know, this addresses a number of important areas, but there remain some challenges which the Office of the Head of Service and the Federal Civil Service needs to work on. As an example, recruitment is not within the purview of the head of the Civil Service. That's within the Federal Civil Service Commission, and it's vitally important that as people come into the system, that aspect of it is reformed as well. So it's a very close partnership with the Federal Civil Service Commission. Also, the issue of promotion is handled by the Federal Civil Service Commission. Again, without a reformed Federal Civil Service Commission, the head of service will be going into this battle with one hand tied behind our back. The issue of pay, which the head of service has quite rightly campaigned for, the issue of pay review, is within the purview of the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission, who have paid lip service to pay reform for as long as I can remember. So a number of the issues that should have been addressed by the Salaries and Wages Commission have still not been addressed. And I hope that the head of service will forge partnership with them to try and address some of these critical issues. Of course, the civil service only makes up something like 6% of the entire public service. As far as Nigerians are concerned, there's no difference between a civil servant and a public servant. So all of the weaknesses and challenges faced by the wider public service gets to be blamed on the civil service itself. That's why the Bureau of Public Service Reform, which I ran, advocated for a wider public service reform strategy, of which this Federal Civil Service Reform Strategy will form a very important component, because the work and the benefit of this strategy can very easily be undone by those organizations and functions within the purview of the Civil Service Federation.
Now, staying with you, Dr. Abba, you've rightly pointed out the fact that reform is continuous in every society. Should there not be a period of time when any particular reform could be sustainable for some time to enable us to know the efficacy of that reform? Now, in fact, you have raised a number of issues with respect to the Civil Service Commission and others. Now, what would you prefer to be the right thing to do to assist the civil service now to have that cooperation with the other branches that you have mentioned to see how we can come up with a reform that can be sustained for a period of time?
Well, like I said, the Bureau of Public Service Reform has, for the past 10 years, actually, been pushing for a wider public service reform program, which will include even things like, public financial management, reforms to the laws guiding the public service, including possibly a public service act itself. I know that the head of service did constitute a committee some time ago to look at the possibility of a public service act. You'll notice that, for instance, the public service rules are not, you cannot legislate the public service rules. You cannot go to court. You cannot litigate the public service rules. So sometimes when the public service rules may not be in complete tandem with the law, it has to be set aside. An example I can give you is where the public service rules once said that civil servants cannot belong to political parties. That has been overturned by the Supreme Court. You also had a recent case where a minister was going to run for public office. The public service rules say you need to give, I think, 3 months notice, and you need to resign at least 3 months before you run for office. The INEC regulations are not very clear on the matter. And so there was this argument as to, okay, is it 3 months or 1 month? There was a lack of clarity in that regard. And people will argue, well, does the public service rules apply only to civil servants or to public servants, although it's called service rules? So I think a public service act would have made this a lot clearer and specified an action that binds all of the civil service. I think the fact that the federal service reform strategy has a time frame and has such a clear implementation framework, it's very, very possible to actually monitor progress and see how well things are going. And it's also very good that there's a governance structure that goes all the way to the president himself. So I think this clear monitoring and evaluation framework will make it easy for Nigerians to actually track progress against what has been promised.
All right, Dr. Joe Abba, thank you very much. We'll press you in the meantime of raising my colleague Kiri had also indicated, responding to his last question. You referenced again the Supreme Court decision talking about whether public servants could belong to political parties. But I think that there's a caveat that ultimately your rules of engagement, your rules of service will determine whether or not you belong to a political party. So that you also indicated could be resolved by a piece of legislation. But let's pause here in the meantime and return to our guest here, Dr. Otiva Ibuzo. Dr. Otiva Ibuzo, of course, you've listened to the head of service of the civil service of the Federation, and Dr. Joe Abba. Reforms all over again, and it's asked Dr. Joe Abba, is this a carousel? If we had reforms flying at 30,000 feet, what was difficulty in bringing them to 3,000 feet or even 3 feet, so that everybody could see it, walk along with it, and then get a more efficient and productive civil service?
Thank you very much. I think the point that is quite clear, and I agree that reform is a continuous process. As a matter of fact, currently there are over 100 countries across the world that are doing one form of public service reform or the other. So reform is a continuous process. The strategy that has been put in place, I think, is a good strategy, but like has been noted, implementation is the graveyard of public policies in Nigeria. And if you look at it carefully, what we want from the civil service or public service are at least 4 key things. One, that is effective. So when we say it's effective, it means that it delivers on the objectives for which it was set up. So if you have a ministry or housing, the effectiveness is that people have affordable houses to live in. Second is that it's efficient, which means that the resources they put in give the maximum benefit. Thirdly is that it's accountable. So he's able to give explanations of his actions. And they will not be the only ones who will understand their actions. And finally, that they are responsive to the needs of the people. And if you look at a modern civil service or modern public service, they have at least 3 key functions. And at times in Nigeria, we discuss these issues and not go back to the basics. First is that public service provide services. So if you want to measure any reform, you go back to services. Provide services to citizens. And secondly is to provide an enabling environment for growth and prosperity. And then thirdly, to secure and strengthen democratic institutions. And if you look at the tragedy of civil service in Nigeria, like the head of civil service mentioned, there has been several reforms, you know. But in my view, part of the challenges of the public service go beyond the public service itself. There are challenges of society. I know that, and I think that's one of the problems we have in this country. When we want to discuss civil service like this, we say civil service solve the problem, what can be done. We focus on civil service and we overlook the other general issues that impact on the civil service. So for instance, there is challenge of orientation. The way people look at things, the way people look at public service. You know, today, what we see in reality is that there are many civil servants who have been in office for 5 years. They've not touched any file. They don't have an office. They don't have a table. So people have a sense of entitlement. Now, once you have the appointment letter, you must have your salary. You do nothing. You know, there are people, you know, who live in other states, different from where they are. These are what we see as citizens. So there is issue of orientation. There is also issue of capacity. You know, I've argued this several times, and it appears many people do not even see it. If you look at our own situation, for instance, in the past few years, there has been change of government from People's Democratic Party to APC. Now, if you go to the Constitution and manifesto, especially manifesto of APC and manifesto of PDP, they are different. The philosophical basis are different. While you look at the manifesto of PDP, you see neoliberal policies and economies. You see the manifesto of APC is anchored on the philosophy of social democracy. And these have policy and program implications. In other clime, as the election is going on, the public service will prepare 2 policy options. Let me give an example. Housing policy, for instance, for a party like PDP, is different from housing policy of a party like APC. Because APC, as a philosophy of social democracy, will have social housing. So the capacity to do all of this is very challenging. And then the entire environment riddled with corruption, with a lot of discretion. And, you know, many of the things, whether they are legal or not legal, you know, there is no follow-up. And it has been proven clearly that all over the world, whenever you have monopoly and discretion combined with the absence of integrity, transparency, and accountability, corruption will thrive. We see, like Joaba mentioned, recruitment. That is, I mean, watching from outside, you know, recruitment procedures that are not transparent. When you see other countries that have effective civil service, they have a civil service college. In fact, the competition for recruitment into civil service is very high. And you recruit the best. We all talk about Singapore, you know. They are recruitment process. You recruit the best so the civil service so that they also give you the best. And you look at questions of welfare. You pay somebody 80,000 naira to live in Abuja. He can't have a house in Abuja. He will be living in Niger State. The transport alone will take the 18,000. And what do you expect?
Yeah, Dr. Otiba Ibuzo, let's pause you in the meantime. But there's nobody on level 1 in the Federal Civil Service. So there's nobody who will earn 18,000. Okay. But you've made a number of very important points. Let's bring in again the head of the Civil Service of the Federation. We've talked about the philosophical underpinnings of EPIC. Now, how will EPIC play out on the field? In other words, tell us EPIC at work. And take along this same question. We are here in Abuja, and yet perhaps, you know, the civil servants and other public servants who have issues with your office, you know, will listen to what you are doing, go to the Federal Secretariat. What happens at the state level, where you also have federal staff, where the evidence shows that the Federal Secretariats are mostly rotten?
The challenge we are facing with the Federal Secretariats at the state level is very difficult and very problematic but because the Federal Secretariats at the state level are not under my purview in terms of the infrastructure. The staff, yes, but not the infrastructure. And I'm aware that the Minister for Power Works and Housing, whose office oversees these Federal Secretariats, has made a case before the Executive Council. So it's now a matter of waiting for the budget implementation. So there is some hope there. Now, talking about how do we move from the drawing board to reality, that is where the project management teams have been set up. Now, for each of the 8 priority areas, there's a project management team headed by a director, a director with a relevant background and schedule. So these 8 teams are, you can look at it like they are balanced on 2 legs. 4 activities on the leg of capacity development and 4 activities on the leg of automation. Now, on capacity development, we have the training, and that training involves training that is structured for all the levels, junior staff to the senior staff. Then we have the leadership enhancements and development. That is for the senior cadre, the directorate cadre. Then we have what we call a peculiar elite corps we are trying to develop in the service. And these are the young ones who have a very bright, who look very bright, performance is very bright. We call them residential cohorts, and we are going to develop these cohorts that they are going to be a special elite team, like we discovered in many countries. They identify prospective stars from let's say level 10 and between 10 to 14 and start grooming them for leadership. So that's for the team on capacity development. Then there's the talent sourcing team. The talent sourcing, we identified that in the short run, we will not be very practical. We will not be able to capture the category of talent we want to bring into the service. So this talent team is work on identifying talent from private sector and international agencies that can come in. Their coming in is not going to frustrate the upward progression of the career of civil servants, but is to help them in developing their own capacity. We have started this with the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. We have a gentleman in the oil and gas department that has been brought in from Shell to help in that department. Then there's of course, the staff welfare, which is very critical. We are pushing for improved pay package and allowances for civil servants, because just like Dr. Joe Abba said, there's a difference between the civil service and the public service. The civil service is a subset of the public service. So you find that in the enlarged public service, you have parastatals that are earning fantastic sums of money. You have paramilitary and the military. What they are earning, you cannot compare with the civil servants. This group of the public service that are the civil servants, they are just about 80,000. They earn peanuts. You said they don't earn 18,000. A driver in the civil service earns 18,000.
You still have
project drivers.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they earn as low as 18,000, 20,000 naira a month. So you can, that goes up. You have a director who has been in the service for almost 30 years, due for retirement. He's having a monthly take home of just about 300,000, whereas that is the starting point in a parastatal. I wouldn't name, but some parastatals I know, fresh graduates are starting on 300,000, 350,000, and you want the civil servant, the director, to go and supervise such an agency. Of course, he will be easily bought over. I'm not that I am campaigning for corrupt practices, but human beings are very fickle, very, very fickle. So you see this type of things.
Let me just interject, head of service. This issue has been on for many years with regard to bridging the wage disparity across the public service and the civil service. What is the status of the campaign to bridge this wage disparity?
One thing the nation has suffered from in the recent past is the short lifespan of so many heads of service. So a head of service may come in, start trying on something, and then before he can gather momentum, he has to retire based on age and all that. And again, but again, in this particular case, we have the Presidential Minimum Wage Committee that is sitting, National Minimum Wage Committee. So I'm speaking on behalf of the civil service. I believe this is an opportunity when all these disparities can be brought to the table and resolved. So that is as per the salary disparity. Then of course there's the culture, going back to the project teams activities. There's the culture change. We have to change the mindset of the civil servants. Civil servants, what I'm preaching to civil servants now is that you must have dignity. You must have self-esteem, your best, everything about you. You have the shoulders. The whole Nigerian nation is balanced on. So don't look at yourself as a riffraff. Look at yourself with dignity. We're trying to do a lot of minds changing, giving people that feeling that they are something to be reckoned with. That is on the capacity and personnel, human personnel leg. Now, on the automation leg, because this is the 21st century, there's really not much you can achieve without imbibing global best practice. And everywhere in the world, any service that is moving forward has to take digitalization of its operations very seriously. So in that regard, we have the enterprise content management system that is to introduce digitalization processes to all our operations, both record keeping, data management, and so on. And that's going to cost quite a lot. Then, of course, the IPIS, the Integrated Personnel and Payroll Information System. All along, we've been working only on the payroll module, whereas there are 4 other critical modules that must be introduced. And these are the HR modules that are under the Office of the Head of Service. So with the IPIS being fully, the HR module coming on fully on board, we'll be able to have proper personnel records. We'll be able to develop a learning and development strategy for our staff that we can be monitoring, not a situation now where just a handful getting trained while others for years have not done anything outside their routine work. Then we'll also have the employee mobility on that HR module, employee mobility whereby we can post people to their relevant areas of their profession and exposure, also according to the pooling system. And then, of course, we have the business services. On that with that module, a civil servant apply for his leave, write his memos, everything will just be done, online. So this is on the IPIS module activity. Then we are bringing in a completely different concept to the service, and that is innovation. We realize that we have a lot of people in the service who have a lot of good and innovative ideas. So we're saying, okay, we need to create innovation challenges like 2 to 3 times in a year, where staff are allowed to come up with ideas that have these peculiarities. One, that can reduce the cost of governance, that can, 2, generate revenue for government, that 3, just like Dr. Otive said, improve efficiency, management of resources, and best practices for meeting the needs of the public. More effective practices.
We'll stop you there, but we'll return to you, right? And because a number of issues have been raised, and you have actually dissected some of the issues raised by Dr. Otive Ibuzo, because you provided us with the information regarding the step-by-step action that has been taken in form of modules, right? And we now have to take a break. But when we come back, we'll return to you for further explanations. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, the program continues. Stay with us.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of Africa's largest television network, Nigerian Television Authority. Let's go very quickly over to our guest, who is still with us via Skype. That's Dr. Joe Abba, joining us from Holland. Dr. Joe Abba, I'm sure that you had the benefit of listening to the detailed explanation by the head of the civil service of the Federation with regard to the current reform agenda, the 2 major planks of it, the one dealing with personnel and then the other, of course, dealing with ICT. From your perspective, are these workable ideas once they begin to roll out?
Absolutely, they're very workable. The head of service is absolutely right that without digitization, the service will continue to be slow and bureaucratic, and the culture does need to change. There are a few other things that it will be important to pay attention to, because all of these things have a way of working together rather than independent of each other. Otive is absolutely right that the civil service of any advancing country should be in a position to create wealth, and that is what the innovation function of this strategy tries to do. But in order to do that, there needs to be clarity about what the ministry is supposed to deliver in line with the government's own agenda. Now, that clarity of what the ministry is there to deliver goes down to what the departments within the ministry are there to deliver, the units are there to deliver, and then what the individual is there to deliver. And so the individual goes to work on a Monday morning knowing very clearly how they are contributing to government's agenda to grow wealth. This is also what forms the critical part of the performance management system that the strategy wants to put in place. It should also, over time, perhaps start to affect issues of pay. Now, it's when you do this and you start to get clear job descriptions for every function, you can then evaluate those job descriptions and put a value to each job. That way, it's no longer, oh, because parastatal A can lobby better than parastatal B, they get to pay their staff more than others. What you then have is a clear system of evaluating a job. So you are paid for the job you do, not for where you work. And so these are the things, all of these things need to work together. They need to tie together to ensure the success of this very laudable strategy. But I want to commend the head of service. I of course, when I was in government, I had the opportunity to make an input into the development of this strategy. I'm aware of the enormous work that has gone into it. I'm aware of the level of consultation that the head of service undertook to make sure that this strategy is owned by everyone else. I think she has addressed a number of the critical issues around our public services, but I think those other things, the way that we manage our parastatals, if we don't address those, they will have an effect of undermining the laudable initiatives that she's put into place. Our parastatals, we don't have a head of the public service in the way that we have a head of the civil service. A lot of our parastatals are laws unto themselves. They basically decide what they do, what they pay each other. We don't have clarity about how much control even ministers have over them. So you always get this tension as to whether a minister can discipline a director general or not. All of these issues must be sorted out. The civil service can function a lot better with the strategy that the head of service has put in place. I think the benefits of the strategy will be maximized if it is extended more widely into the public service.
All right. At this point, to thank you for reaching us all the way from Holland. And your insight has been very, very impactful. We thank you once again for being part of Good Morning Nigeria for today. That's Dr. Joe Abba, former Director General, Bureau of Public Service Reforms. All right, now our guest in Kaduna is quite seated at this point, and they would like to say hello to him. Habib Balarabe Yakubu. He's the former head of civil service in Kaduna State. Thank you, sir, for joining us this morning. You have listened to the head of civil service of the Federation, Mrs. Ayo Ita, who has, of course, enumerated some of the models designed to address the challenges confronting the civil service system in Nigeria. We have also listened to Dr. Tive Ibuzo, who raised some critical issues with respect to orientation, welfare, and of course capacity building. Now, what's your take in what I have posited this morning?
Thank you very much. My apologies for coming late. I thought the time was 8, not 7. Sorry about that. The topic that is being discussed is a very important one to our country, particularly now that things are what they are. I impressed, actually, very impressed with the the statements or presentations by the Federal Service of the Federation in relation to trying to keep the spirit, the efforts going in order to have an effective and efficient civil service. Well, I was in the service before I retired in 2011 for 34 years, and this is a thing that I'm very familiar with. But I have some few additions to make in addition over and above what the head of service has said. The remuneration issue is maybe the most important that has to be addressed by the government. We cannot continue to fool ourselves that you give somebody 18,000 naira today and expect that person to be not corrupt, to be efficient, and so on and so forth. I'm happy His Excellency the President is very concerned about that, and things are being done to ensure that improvements are in place. I only hope that what will come up, the new pay structure of staff in the civil service is going to be adequate, and that it will be maintained for the time that it should last. You know what I mean is, if you increase the pay of the civil servants and then you allow it to run for 10 years, that becomes only useful for a little. You know, it has to be the time when it will be reviewed. Most of the issues in relation to advanced countries, things are normally 3, 4, 5 years. And in particular, I was a student in London those days. I remember very well that the remuneration package of the civil service in England was linked to the index relating to pricing of commodities. Every year, the labor movement in England, then, I don't know about now, but I believe it is still there, they face government and tell the government that the inflation has increased by so and so percentage between last year and this year, and that we need an increase in our pay to the level, to the limit, to the level of the improvement or increase in the inflation rate. Now, that is to do with the remuneration, and we just have to be very realistic and insistent. Ensure that it lasts only for the period that it should last. If it is 3 years, fine, but you cannot give me an increase and expect that I would take it for 30 years, 10 years or so. Then the issue of overstaffing, we know that such things have been happening. Governments have been sending their staff away in relation to overstaffing. I'm just putting it in a very simple way. It has been happening, but who is responsible for those overstaffing that unscheduled retirement people? Also, most of the time they live without even their rights, pensions and gratuities and so on, and the retirements are sudden, such that gaps are created. You know, gaps are created, and you don't like, if you take, for instance, a revenue officer. I was a revenue officer before. You don't just pick revenue officers, ready revenue officers in the market. You know, no, you train them. You train them. It's just like if you want to have a replacement in the military, you don't just take a graduate and say make him a major or a captain. No, that person has to go through a process of training and retraining and so on and so forth. And we have problems to do with that. The reasons why there are so many cases of overstaffing and so on and so forth, we know them very well. It is, as far as I'm concerned, is to do with the upper echelon of the civil service. I heard about the secretary, the directors, and so on and so forth, and that we allow other forces, like what I mean by other forces, the politicians are there. I hope we'll discuss this, even if it is for a few minutes, to understand one of the major weaknesses of the civil service of the Federation, both at the state and the federal level. Now, the issue of, still on the issue of staffing, there has been and is still there the involvement of politicians in relation to the administration of the civil service, in relation to the effectiveness and efficiency of the civil servants and their care, remuneration, and inspirational issues, and so on and so forth. Who is responsible who is responsible as in the ministry or a person? Who is the
Honorable Yakub, former head of service of Kaduna State, would like to pause you in the meantime. We have a lot of reactions from our viewers, and this have come in by way of tweets. You have the Twitter handle, that's the bottom left-hand corner at NTA GML. Let's quickly take some of the tweets now. Nasiru Idris tweets, implementation of TSA has reduced corruption and blocked leakages on the system. The review of salaries is key to effective service delivery. For example, uniform salary scale across all MDAs without discrimination because all went to the same school. And
from Omobola or BAPS, the significant change I noticed is that civil servants who were hitherto used to free monies are not happy with President Buhari. The implementation of TSA was a big blow to them. Several leakages were blocked, which have forced many of them to live in their means.
Festus Akimboyewa tweets, there has been ambitious civil service reform in the last 3 years, but there seems to be no desire to learn from international experience. It's time to publicly hold permanent secretaries to account for their performance and to reduce political control over the civil service and appointment of senior officials.
And for Victor Ihiosuma, the civil service is the engine room of administration, but over time it has become a bed of corruption. The notorious issue of ghost workers and the aiding of political heads to siphon our common wealth is alarming. However, with the new reforms, including retraining of workers, there is hope.
If the government can go ahead with the recent proposal of the Minister of Finance that government agencies should be made to run the activities via electronic payments, it will reduce the reckless spending and easily scrutinize doubtful transactions, thereby putting the pay to corruption.
Akeju Olabaju, the civil service morale is at the lowest end. This has affected the service delivery of the citizenry. It creates within the unenviable environment that makes it difficult to fight corruption, which is endemic but perpetrated by few. There is, however, more room for reforms.
Sonny Michael Amakoji, we have not had a lot of nationwide strikes as it used to be in the past. But the civil service has not really witnessed any positive change as the minimum wage remains and no innovation or incentive introduced. The civil service deserves a lot better.
El Kuso Amo, no amount of reform will succeed in the civil service without motivation. What is the latest on the minimum wage for Nigerian workers?
Sonny Michael Makoji again says the civil service can hardly demand for their rights these days because of factional Adams Oshomole seems to have gone with unionism. They must make a headway. They need to reorganize their leadership structure.
Right, Festus Akimboyewa, politicization of our civil service is still a challenge. The high number of political appointees in the service should be addressed if we must insulate our public service from political pressures.
Akeju Olagbaju tweets, in 2006, under the directive of the then Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, we operated a peer review mechanism amongst our staff and departments. This alone creates efficiency in the Ministry of Finance, and it should be institutionalized as part of the reform agenda. Those are the tweets that we have in the meantime. Otiba Ibuzo, of course, we're wrapping up now. You listen to the detailed explanation by the head of the civil service of the Federation with regard to what the reform will entail. What's your take on this? Are there other areas that we need to further, to ensure that at the end of the day, all of these things will deliver, and in particular that there is a mechanism for monitoring the performance of those who are the beneficiaries of those reforms?
Yeah, the presentation of the strategic plan looks comprehensive. Like we said earlier, implementation is the graveyard of public policies in Nigeria. And from the head of service presentation, there are some issues, even within the presentation, that will determine the success or not of that strategic plan. For execution of any project at all, you need to focus on three issues. First is the strategy of implementation itself.
She wants to talk.
And that strategy of implementation has to be thought out, looking at least 4 dimensions. The objective of the strategy itself, the organization, and you have talked about 8 different things that will make the strategy to be implemented. The context, that is very important. The environment of implementation, because a strategy that may be good in UK is good in Nigeria. So the Nigerian environment must be taken into consideration, and the strategic moves that you will take to avoid all of this. That is number 1. Then number 2 is the operational plan for implementation. You know, we have to be clear on what is to be done, who is to do it, what will be done, how it will be done, and the budget.
All right, sir.
Number 3.
And the budget.
Number 3.
Number 3
very quickly,
are the people who will implement it.
Okay. Let's stop you there. Thank you so much. I would like to return to Madam. Now, what is the mechanism or strategy in performance management in the civil service?
Okay, now performance management is one critical area that I didn't mention when I was talking about the 8 key activities. And it's very critical because if people say they want to be recognized, they want to be respected, they want to be paid a better package of salary and allowances, it means that they should be ready to provide the services for which they are being paid. Performance management is very critical. Before in the service, how performance management has been carried out through the annual performance report is very subjective on the upper form. Now we have introduced the performance management strategy that is linked, that links an officer's performance to his the mandate of his agency and his particular schedule of duty, vis-a-vis the resources that have been that are at his available to him, at his disposal, and the training that has also been given to him. And this system is such that we have developed a pilot study which we have applied. We are now applying in the Office of the Head of Service and 2 other ministries. Performance management is very critical because if a civil servant is going to show reason, give any reason for his being given added value, he must have the value added to his service. Now, we have also discovered that PMS, just like you said, it has to be in the context of this environment. Different countries have tried different things, but for example, I'll tell you, in Singapore, one way they assess an officer or a department is what is the financial value he has brought to the GDP of the country. So definitely, to whom much is given, much is expected, and that's what we are passing across to civil servants.
All right, Mrs. Winifred Oyoita, I would like to thank you very much. We're pressed for time, and we didn't imagine that this was going to drag on for this length of time. Just before we go over to our Kaduna Network Center to take the closing thoughts of our guests, very briefly as well, pay disparity. I'm sure you are familiar with the complaints of directors, that directors and permanent secretaries, the pay disparity is humongous, if not scandalous. And yet, permanent secretaries are picked from amongst directors. They are pairs, and when they become a permanent secretary, the pay difference is 300%.
Oh, well, the issue of this pay difference, like I said earlier, all these are going to be addressed at the Presidential National Minimum Wage Committee. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Habib Balarabe Yakubu, please, very quickly, you were talking about political interference or intervention in the civil service, exactly what would you like not to see?
Elected or appointed, they should be trained before they start work to understand the A's to Z's of the civil service, so that the civil service would go along with them. Otherwise, there would continue to be problems. Then, of course, I would want to quickly add or address this to the head of service of the Federation. The experiences that I personally had is that who is really in control of the civil service, particularly in relation to payroll management. The head of service is in charge of human resources management in the service, and then the Ministry of Finance is responsible for the payment of salaries and allowances and even pensions. Then the payroll is controlled by who? Is it the Ministry of Finance or the Office of the Head of Service? This is one area that has to be looked at, controls place, so that we would get rid of this massive loss of millions or billions of naira in relation to ghost workers and so on. Otherwise, I believe we've done justice to the issue, and that this review that we're doing is so important, and that I hope it will continue to be on a regular basis rather than annual.
All right. Alhaji Habib Balarabe Yakubu, former head of service of Kaduna State, would like to appreciate you for being part of our conversation today. Thanks a lot. You joined us from Kaduna. And we also would like to thank Dr. Otiva Ibuzo, Executive Director, African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development. Pleasure for being with us.
Thank
and
you.
our appreciation too to the head of the Civil Service of the Federation, Mrs. Winifred Oyoita. Thanks a lot for your time and your